They also have a copy of the feedback, sorry, not the feedback, the advice that I've given you about how to write your report. So if you go to any of the writing lab sessions, the feedback that they give you about writing a report will be exactly the same as I am telling you, and that will also mean it will be exactly the same as the way I mark your assignment. Okay? So if you do go along to the writing labs, you can kind of trust their, well, you can trust their advice anyway, but you can very specifically trust their advice about this assignment because they have all the information. Okay? What I've also done to help in terms of writing the report is today in the seminar, I've set out an example of the kind of the table of contents, so the structure of a report that you might choose to use. And then next week, for those of you who come along in the catch-up sessions, I'll also go through the report in the same way. If you're not able to come along to the catch-up sessions next week, the slides, so all of the presentation, or what we're going to discuss in terms of the report structure are all online as well. So under week 12, you'll see there's a PDF for the seminar session, and that has a detailed step-by-step guide to what I expect you to do in each bit of the assessment. And it also points you to what kinds of information we've already covered that will help you to prepare for the assessment as well. Okay? So, like I've said before, there are no tricks. I will not mark you down if you exactly copy the structure that I've set out in the seminar this week. Equally, I won't mark you down if you use a different structure, as long as your structure is clear and you deliver for me all the things that I want in terms of the assessment criteria. Okay? All right, so those are the announcements. As I say, I will be here next week at the same time, and both I and Claire will be here in the usual seminar slots. If you want, like, there's some extra content and for discussing the assessment again. Okay, so today, just kind of bringing together a topic that we've I guess kind of addressed peripherally throughout the course, which is the Internet of Things. Hopefully you've looked at the Internet of Things MOOC content that I shared and some other resources, so you're starting to get a sense of what I mean by terms like pervasive or ambient computing, and what I mean by the Internet of Things. Before we get there, I just wanted to kind of give you some examples of how some of the theory that we've discussed in terms of design practices is implemented. And so these ones are examples that you might choose to look at when you're thinking, what kinds of methods, how can I bring a variety of methods together as part of my design process? Also, just to remind you, Goki's talks, the whole reason that I commissioned Goki to record those was to give you an end-to-end example of this design process as well. Because he talks about personas, he uses a variety of different design methods, he's from a design school which is focused on design thinking. So all the things we've talked about are kind of, it's instantiated in Goki's videos. Okay, but just some other examples. The reason I put this one up is because it's interesting in terms of its critique. So you might use a similar critical approach in your writing. In essence, the critique is that much work, in this case it happens to be archaeological, it's around archives, but the main point is that there has been a tendency to design systems around the resources, so resource-centric, so designed around the thing that you're trying to give access to, rather than the needs and the pain points associated with the users of those resources. So when you're thinking about your installation, if your installation is about selling lots of shoes, Then for example, your interface, you don't want to go down the kind of the tunnel of being focused on the object itself, the focus of study. In that case, the item of clothing, we're looking at an item of footwear. All of what you're writing about, all of your design process should be user-centered. Should be about what we want to buy some shoes, or we want to use an archaeological archive, what our interests are, how we interact with those resources. So don't get lost in the thing itself. Focus on the person. Okay. Something that also reminds me, another thing not to get lost in is the technology. So I was just talking outside about the report. You will all be tempted, well I hope you'll be tempted, to write effusively, excitedly about these different kinds of technologies that we've talked about. You need to rein in a bit of your enthusiasm there, at least in terms of the amount that you're writing. Don't give me lots and lots of description of the resource. So don't write a lot about the archive, or don't write a lot about the machines, and don't write lots and lots about specific technologies. I do not need to hear how photogrammetry works. I don't need to know how different forms of, galvanic responses sensors work, or how pressure-sensitive haptic interfaces. I don't need the detail. I just need to know what they do, what they don't do so well, and how you can use them. Yeah? This is also helpful to you, hopefully, because it levels the playing field. Some of you have very, strong technical backgrounds, applied technical backgrounds, and others of you don't. This is a level playing field. I care about what the technologies do, not the specifics of how they do it. All right? Anyway, okay, so this example is nice in that it says people have got lost in thinking about the thing that you were trying to do, trying to give access to, rather than the people. Okay, so and look at their approach for trying to counter this, the series of design methods they use. And in this particular case, they use a prototyping, so in this case a digital prototyping rather than a paper prototyping method. So a Python library for rapidly creating mock-ups of interfaces, and interfaces that start to have some of the affordances of the real thing. All right, so this is just one example. Again, from the perspective of your assignment, if you happen to be a Python developer, or you happen to be familiar or happy with these kinds of frameworks, then fine, by all means use it if you want. But the only credit that I'll assign you in terms of your mark is these, your screenshots of the interface that you produced. It may be that by experimenting with the technology you learn something. Yeah. So it may be that the practice of using some software helps you to understand the problem. Great. Then you can write about it. But what I'm marking you on is not how well you implemented an interface. Yeah? You do not have to do any of that at all. Hammer it home. Yeah? If you choose to, then fine. If it's helpful, fine. If it's helpful for you to 3D print some objects, then great. Or to do some photogrammetry, then fabulous. But in the end, what I'll mark is this plus some tables. Some pictures, some text, some diagrams, some tables, and so on. Okay, is that crystal clear to everybody? Yeah? Any questions about that balance between practice, applied things, and the report? No? Sure? Okay. Just don't spend the next 3 months learning Python, okay? Or you may have been anyway, but if you're assessed on it for something else, fine, brilliant. But don't do it for me, don't do it for me. Well, in this case, what the prototyping allowed them to do was to reflect on the interfaces, but I say also, like when I was talking about graphics last week or the week before, by doing, and spending time doing, creating a prototype or drawing things or making prototypes in Photoshop, you do start to think in different ways. about the problem. So in this case, they thought in different ways about how to design websites for searching. Yeah. If you think back to Javier's talks about TUIs, tangible user interfaces, it's the same thing. So he experimented with these cardboard interfaces as a way of changing how search was done. So making the cardboard objects was as much a part of the process, the design process, as the creating the working interface. All right, so that's one nice example you can copy. This is another one. So this is about designing. It happens to be a museum interface. What's important from you though is the design approach that was used. So in this case, they wrote scenarios. So they wrote scenarios about how users. It was from 3 foreign tourists who were. That was the persona that was used, or 3 personas, and they were acting out a scenario where they used this display in a museum. So the process was that a page or a couple of pages of scenario was written, then the people acted it out, so role played through the scenario, and then went back and tried it again. If you cast your mind back 3 months ago, whatever it is, when we started with the body storming, clearly this is a different approach. The body storming, all bets are off. You can just design everything from scratch. Whereas in this, it's a brainstorming approach plus research. So they wrote the scenario and then tested it out through the role playing. All right, but say read that, and that again might provide you with another example of what I'm looking for, how you set out the balance between these different processes. What's really nice about this paper actually is the structure. So the way that one design method builds on another, the kind of the narrative of the design process is really, really clear in here, and it would be something that you could certainly copy. It's not a bad word. Okay, just kind of to highlight that what we're going on to now is going to be Internet of Things, and many of these interfaces are predicated on these multi-sensory experiences that we've talked about at length. I just want to bring this up as a reminder to one that hasn't been spoken about or developed to a great extent, which is the olfactory, so the kind of the smell indication. We've kind of mentioned it in passing, but there's a really nice olfactory example of use of the Internet of Things called the dead man's nose. Have I mentioned that to you before? Stuart Eaves' Dead Man's Nose. Okay, if not, I had a feeling I might not have done. Okay. No, Dead Man's Nose, Stuart Eaves. Has he got a video? There we go. Okay, so Stuart Eaves is an old friend and has been doing quite a lot of experimentation using the Internet of Things in the context of location-aware heritage interpretation. So, he doesn't have a video on this one. I showed you previously a video of his AR interface in class, his augmented reality interface, which is a visual one, primarily. But he's also created the dead man's nose, where as you wander around the site, puffs of smell are delivered according to your location. He's also did one, I don't think it is called Dead Man's Ears, but maybe it should be, which is where you wander around the graveyard, and as you move towards the gravestones, you start to hear the inscription on the gravestone being read out to you. So it's automatically generated or manually recorded language. So as you wander around the graveyard, there's this kind of sort of susurration, this kind of sort of whispering, and as you move nearer to particular gravestones, the story of that person is kind of passed on to you. He's a good example for you to draw on for your assignments because he is a kind of a hacker and maker, so he brings things together. He has publicly described his prototyping methods. He's using multi-sensory approaches, and is perfectly bridging digital and physical experiences. Okay, so Stuart Eve, I think he's at Leicester at the moment on a postdoc, but he's also a director of an archaeology company consultancy in London called LP Archaeology. But you'll find him, Stuart Eve, Dead Man's Nose. Okay, and then also another reminder of Matthew Tyler Jones's work. We've talked about this previously in the context of narrative, and remember at the same time I introduced the work of Daniela Petrelli from Sheffield and her team's work around Internet of Things and location-aware objects. Just to remind you, if you haven't already, read this particular post, because this is a nice example for your assignment of how you set the scene. So how, once you've gone from an initial brief, how you start to develop the context, develop your ideas. So the brief that Matthew Tyler Jones would have used would be something like, you are in an old house and you want people to be able to go wherever they want, but having completed that journey around the house, all of the people should have acquired the same level of knowledge. Right, so that's the design brief. You're in an old house, a castle or whatever, people can go there if they want, but in the end they all know the same range of things. Right, that's the level that I'm looking for in your design brief. Very high level. You might be specific about the place, but that's about it. And then what he did was go on to think, well, what are the challenges in that? What is the challenge about people being able to go wherever they like? How do you know where they've gone? How do you know where they've been previously? These are the same challenges that I identified with respect to Daniela Petrelli's PhD student, who talked about a living house museum. Okay, so then what Matthew goes on to talk about is how the Internet of Things can support this process. Actually, explicitly, how the Internet of Things plus digital narrative from games, how the two things joined together can help in interpretation. So remember that his method allowed you to wander around, and so the example I use quite a lot is the piano. So if this is one room over here, and in this room there is a set of musical notations, a set of pages that has a musical notation or a description of a piece of music. Now, if you had read that, if you pick it up, the computer, or the network, knows that you've picked up and read that particular piece of music, or that piece of writing about a composition. And then you put it down, and later on you go to the room over here, and in the room over here there's a piano. Now, if you've already seen the piece of music, the piano will be sat there. If you haven't seen the piece of music, then the piano will be sat there, but it will be playing. The music will be playing, which will encourage you to go over and make sure you learn about that piece of music. Yeah. So depending on whether you go to that room first or this room first, the spaces will respond to where you've been, respond to your personal history. This is sometimes called ambient computing. Yeah, so the computing being in and of your surroundings. Pervasive computing is where computers are everywhere and they facilitate transmediation. So information passes between different screens, different devices, and so on. Yeah, so that's kind of pervasive media. Ambient is where those pervasive technologies respond to us as people. Yeah, they know what we've done, they know what our aspirations, our interests are. A lot of the things we've talked about in our design seminars have actually been examples of ambient computing, we just haven't described them in that way. So the coffee shop If it knows that you really like flat whites, then and then the coffee shop responds to the fact that you like to drink flat whites, then that is an example of a kind of an ambient computing approach. You walk into an environment, and the environment is as if it's alive, it responds to you. There's almost a symbiosis between the person and the space. Okay, so in this, and in the series of other related blog posts, that's exactly what Matthew is trying to create, this symbiosis, this ambient experience. And I wanted to put this one up again as well as a kind of contrast. Why I ask you to make an installation which is in a real place is because we know that you can do, we know now, as we talked very previously, that you can do acoustic simulation, so you can capture the properties of a real room and then simulate it wherever you are. You can capture the properties of feeling my scarf, or whatever it is you choose to feel, and you can virtually recreate it, right? But for your installation, it may be that you use those kind of methods, but also they're in a place. They are specifically in a particular context, your installation. So when you're writing your report for me, think about what role does that place play? Yeah? So if your installation is about gesture, then would your installation work just as well here as in my office or a room in your house or your flat? Is the installation defined to some extent by the place where it is? Yeah? So that's something to consider. Or is it something that, by using these kinds of technologies, could be anywhere? You could put your haptic glove on wherever you are in the world, and you could still have the same experience. It's not dependent on being in a particular environment. Yeah. Nice example there, kind of parenthetically, something like the ice hotel or an ice bar. Kind of the whole process of putting on kind of the clothing and putting on the gloves in order to pick up the frozen drinks is kind of creating this whole experience. It's a curated journey to help them to charge you a fortune. Okay, but also something we've touched on previously is the fact that these technologies are not neutral, and so I would hope that in your critique within your report, accessibility will feature to some extent. If your installation is all about seeing, then you don't have to say how you're going to deliver content for someone who's blind or partially sighted, but it might be a consideration in your critique. You might be saying that I employed a universal design approach. I think that this interface should be accessible to absolutely everybody, not just in terms of the letter of the law, but in terms of the spirit of the law. I want everybody to experience this installation I've created. In which case, you need to be writing something in your design that talks about how that can work. So it's just another opportunity for how you can be critical and reflecting on your own practice. Yeah. Museums, of course, have done huge amounts of this, huge amounts of work, lots of examples that I've included on Talis and elsewhere already in the presentations of how museums are thinking about accessibility. And a key one has been the engagement with haptics. Not much really in terms of the previous slide, haptics, the virtual touch, but an awful lot around physical touch of objects. Quite a lot of writing about the impact of that on well-being, mental health, dementia. So a lot of work in the kind of the heritage sector about that. Again, for your assignment, think quite specifically about the nature of those multi-sensory experiences that you're creating. Describe to me, tell me how the different sensory modalities will be stimulated, and how will they ebb and flow? Will it just be sound? Will it just be touch? Will there be a kind of a synesthesis, a kind of a combining of these different things? Yeah. Be creative. I put up some terms there which are very commonly associated with this use of Internet of Things in the context of heritage. You could just as easily as usual replace heritage with retail. Exactly the same devices are used in retail contexts at the moment. So BYOD, I think I mentioned previously. Anyone expand the abbreviation? BYOD. There are some people mouthing it. Yay! Bring your own device. You've all done it. You've all brought multiple devices. So BYOD, bring your own device. So this is describing a kind of a change in terms of when you provide, back in the mess of time, people would give you a PDA or some other form of internet connected device that took you around the environment. Now commonly we are expecting people to have their own mobile devices. Again, we sort of touched on this previously, but in fact I think in the very first lecture. But why is it that bring your own device is so common? There's an obvious financial one, right? So the shop or the museum doesn't have to buy it. But there's another one. Data collection. Yeah. So data collection, so they are, I mean, it's brilliant. So you are offloading and incentivizing people to hand over their data. The last one is the biographical component. This is somebody's own device. So in which case, when you deliver content through someone's own device rather than it's been given to them, the nature of the interaction is different. Because it's your thing. It's your personal, curated interface to the world. So bring your own device interactions can have a more immediate, visceral, personalised effect, purely because it's your own device. Beacons, so we talked about those. Beacons are mechanisms for enabling you to do inside location awareness. Yeah, so super common, screens obviously. Pervasive and ambient, actually I've already mentioned. The report gives you, listed here gives you an example of how this is being employed in information. Here's a nice early example as well, showing how a number of different affordances of Internet of Things can kind of work together. So beacons being used in terms of location, so there'll be contextual delivery of content depending on where you are. There may be contextual delivery based on proximity, so whether you've got multiple devices close to each other. Remember we talked about these as the constraints when you designed your art gallery, which was supposed to sell artwork. And some of you talked about mapping areas that were really busy and other areas that didn't have very many people. Okay, so the interface not only can respond to where you are, but how proximal you are to each other, and then the ways in which you interact with these devices can include voice. I'll just come back to that proximity. I've said that the devices the proximity of people might be important, but the whole idea behind the Internet of Things and the interface to it, the Web of Things, or one interface to it, the Web of Things, is that you think equally about the contribution of objects and people and places. When Kat introduced the idea of the actor map, she made it clear that the actors in that actor map can just as well be things and places as they are people. The whole point of that approach is that you consider those three things to be semantically identical. Yeah, it is an actor. It is an active participant in your case, your installation. So when you write your description of your design for your installation, maybe think about it in those terms. Maybe give me an actor map for your installation. So you have a screen, and you have someone with a mobile phone, and you have the person, and those are all actors co-creating this experience. Anyway, yeah. So this particular paper is a nice early or relatively early example of this. One of the first actually examples is a PhD thesis from probably about a couple of years earlier from Bristol, which I think I've mentioned before. Also in the literature around heritage and Internet of Things, we're starting to see, I guess quite similar to Kat's last talk, or her third talk, when she talks about spaces, the construction of kind of active spaces. People in design, in cultural heritage and IoT are thinking about how real spaces and virtual spaces intersect conceptually. So this paper might be of interest to you when you're thinking about the particular location that you want your interface to be. So this paper, this is an example from it, where it's comparing the gallery layout, the one gallery layout of this museum, to the website, and looking at how the kind of virtual space of the website, the structure of the navigation, the way things are categorized, the use of folksonomies and taxonomies, so tagging and categories, how those map onto or are different from the real space. And that again presents an opportunity for design, because do you want your virtual experience, your visitor into your installation, to be exactly mapped onto the physical world, or do you want there to be some kind of deliberate dissonance? So that on the virtual world you perhaps group together objects thematically, you carry around some physical or virtual token, something that is like a bag, a virtual bag of information that you're interested in. And as you walk around the museum, which is organised by perhaps periods, so it might be the Roman section and the Greek section, how does the fact that you're carrying around your thematic knowledge, your bag of things that you've created virtually, how does that kind of intersect with this serial experience going from the Romans to the Greeks to the Neolithic to the Paleolithic, whatever. Okay, so and this is kind of particularly interesting in the three ways there, kind of the impact it has on virtual visits, the impact it has on trails that are created by users, and another kind of concept that's quite useful in terms of your installation is think about the time scale that people are interacting with your installation. Right, so think about specifically how long you envisage people to be in there, and do you envisage people to be able to spend always the same amount of time, or different amounts of time depending on how interested they are, right? Because that will inform your design. So I've spoken previously about the National Theatre production, which ends with the real person hugging the real person sat on the chair. That is a predefined performance. It's always the same every time. It's exactly the same period of time, because there's a beat to it. There's a kind of a rhythm, a dramatic rhythm to that experience. So think about the time of your installation. You might even draw a timeline, perhaps. People have done that in the past. So you might have person enters installation, what happens next is this thing, what happens next is this thing, what happens next is this thing. And it can take 5 minutes, or it can take 20 minutes, or anything in between. Yeah? The other 2 points in time you might have on the timeline are pre-experience and post-experience. Yeah. So how do you make the person aware or prepare them for the experience that they're about to have? Yeah. Disney very, very famously invest as much in the pre-visit experience as they do in the rides. So at Disney World and because in going to kind of a theme park, you're spending more time queuing, more time thinking about the experience that's to come than the actual event that comes. So there kind of is a lot of work around the queuing experience and ways of intervening in that with kind of physical, costume backers or providing digital content. You'll see the same thing in lots of kind of event cinema now as well. So when you design your installation, what do people get before? Do people know what they're going to encounter? Do you lie to them? Do you give them a false expectation for what the interface is going to be like? Do you ask them to do a particular task? Do you give them some homework preparation work? Yeah? So think about this installation in terms of time. And of course, afterwards, how can the people reflect on the experience that they've had? Do they get a tangible reminder? We've talked about that in terms of the 3D printing. So some of you suggested that you design something and then you could 3D print your memento of that experience. So how will that work? Will you give people this opportunity? Can they, as they're wandering around, like in this case, can they collect their bag of things, their conceptual bag of things, as they go from room 23 to room 10, so that when they finish, they're left with a kind of a story or a kind of a memory book that tells you where you've been previously. Again, remember Daniela Petrelli's paper, the one about the Roman oil lamp, where people could walk around and collect details about the different places they visited. Okay. I've given you a series of places to look. So I've talked about like the MIT Tangible Media Group, and Culture Lab at Newcastle, and the Mixed Reality Lab at Nottingham, and a host of other ones. This is the final one that you'll really get a lot of inspiration from in the context, particularly of Internet of Things. Very dry text, but I'll show you some examples which are less dry. But in essence, what this was bringing artists and designers together with technologists to see how those things play together to create Internet of Things. It was quite early in the Internet of Things. I mean, this is the working paper from 2015. I think React was probably already 4 years old by that point, and it was a hub, so it was a kind of a gathering place for a number of university and commercial clients. But the key things they found, and these are the key outcomes. So the first one is basically, if you bring artists and archaeologists and whatever craftspeople together with technologists, the things that you get are more interesting. Yeah, the objects that come out are more interesting. So that's something to remember. Also, when you bring these people together, the kind of experiences of using the objects are richer. So again, thinking about the Daniela Petrelli's lamp, the beautiful thing about the lamp being charged wirelessly was that the lamp gets warm. So when you put the thing on when you put the lamp on the charger, it gets hot. So it feels like a warm lamp, purely as a consequence of the way in which it's charged. But people pass the lamp to each other differently because it's warm. Okay, so what React also identified was that this kind of multisensory, this complexity of interactions was much greater than perhaps some elements of computer science had previously identified. They also talked about the ways in which, they also talked about the ways in which these devices and people can combine. Yep, so this is what Kat's lecture 3 was effectively talking about. This being the intersection of cultural, social theory and technology. And the final one was that they identified that Internet of Things, even at this point, was having more and more impact, not just on what we could do, but on how we felt, how we feel, and how we interact. Yeah. So this idea of not only pervasive computing everywhere, but ambient computing. It's of us. It's creating us. Yeah. Shaping us. It's what Kate Devlin, if any of you are taught by her, talks about a lot in the context of wearable technologies. I don't have time to show you the videos, but these would be great inspiration for you. Just some nice Internet of Things examples. So the Greenstone, that one creates algorithmic music on the basis of emotions. So on the basis of your emotions as indicated by galvanic skin response, I think, and also ECG, so your heart rate. I mentioned the emotive project. That's a kind of nice, has built on that kind of work. On the perpanning, that's around taxidermy. So if I remember right, I think that's a mechanism for visiting things and capturing memories with them. So you go and visit the different bits of the taxidermy museum, and as you go around, the objects that you carry act as this virtual bag. Fans on foot, that's a location-aware device, so it takes you to locations of particular cultural relevance, so it helps guide you. I think it does that by vibration, by tactile feedback. Can't remember. The God article, oh yeah, that's around simulating wind instruments. So you have a replica object that performs and senses your breath. I was telling some people outside earlier that one of the students last year did a kind of dream-focused interface, and breathing was one of the things that she used. So she hypothesised the use of kind of capturing the breath, the breathing of someone whilst they were asleep, and then when they wake up, presenting that as part of the installation. Haptic interactions. That one, the reflector is around the history of the transatlantic slave trade, so again based in Bristol. And this is an object that tells stories, so it prints out stories for you and provides different multimedia content at the same time. I just wanted to show you an example of some of kind of our work in this space. So this is a project called Chronotape. Actually, I'll show this one first. This one. Okay, so this was us trying to make a timeline tangible. I'll turn the sound down. All right. So this is trying to represent the kind of time depth of, in this case, personal history. So it was, family histories. And obviously we can make timelines. This is, ChronoZoom, which is a Microsoft timeline, with loads and loads of these digital ways of expressing time. The Simile timeline from the Night Labs media group, which you might have heard of. But in this, we wanted to create tangible expressions of time. And you can print out the tape at different scales. So if you're interested in a week, you can print out a length of tape this long, which was divided into days or hours. But equally, if you're interested in millennia, you could print out a bit of tape this long, which was 5,000 years. We had data that was able to be overlaid on the tape, and so you're mixing the digital and the physical interface. And the buttons enable you to annotate this timeline. I'll just show you the other bit, so the annotation in these. Those of you who are doing the making club, by the way, I think we've got some buttons a bit like that, so you'll be doing something with possibly Arduinos, Raspberry Pis at some point. So there you see you're annotating on the timeline with digital data, but your timeline that you've produced will then remember that combination of the digital and physical information. And you've got the ability to annotate in text, so by writing, but there's also that is translated into digital annotation in the archive. So this nice mixture of the physical and digital that I've been going on and on. Okay, so another example. So that's Pete, who is one of the researchers on the Patina project that I was one of the co-investigators. Okay, just to finish up. So remembering that we have all of these different kinds of forms of interaction that we can create, and that increasingly all of the components can become active. I've shown you this before, the augmented reality sandbox, but we don't care about the exact technology, we don't care about how it works, we care about the implications of that technology. So we care about what would be different if the cloud could be made active itself? What if you could tell when the person was digging away the sand as well as capturing it using the Connect? I have shown this one before, right? You've all seen those sandbox, yeah? Is there a yes or no? Yes? Okay. Yeah, so I say, but when I showed it to you, it was about, here is an example of the interface using the sand as this physical thing. But now what I'm saying is, how can you enhance that so that the different components have their own role to play? They become active participants. Yeah, that's just an example of using bring your own device, so you don't need to go through those. Last one, so yeah, so Sarah Kendradine, yeah, no, we don't need those ones. I want to rush through to the end. This is it. Yeah, okay, so there's just some other papers that have relevant relevance to it. In the kind of description for this week, a lot of the examples around the Internet of Things talk about smart cities and smart homes, and they're interested in the flow of data between devices and between people, and that's what we're going to be concentrating on in the seminar. But why I've put these up as kind of thinking questions that you may have thought about in advance of the lecture, if not, I'd like to think about afterwards, is because these are another way that you could characterise your report of your own installation. Yeah, so how could you, I was asked before this session, does the installation have to be multiple people? And no, it can be just one person, or it can be a number of different people. If it's a number of different people, then how are you joining up the experiences of those different people? How are you sharing data between those different people? Do you want to be sharing information between them? Yeah. Do you want to, on one of the previous slides is, do you want to just inform people, or do you want them to perform in the space? Yeah. Do you want to make them interact in a way that you're influencing them to behave? Also think about the objects that you're creating in terms of their biography. So, does your installation do elements of the installation describe itself? This ability to self-describe is a common element in the Internet of Things. The ability that if you want to buy another glorious golden Starbucks drinking vessel, that you can find out precisely which one it is, because the device itself can communicate with you and tell you, I am a gold Starbucks drinking vessel. And then finally, I think just the last point is we talked a little bit about transmediation. In Bernard's talk, he made, I think, a really good example showing how information flows between people and between different devices. Transmediation becomes even more powerful when you're in an ambient environment. So when the information doesn't just pass between the screens randomly or on demand, but rather when the environment is telling you how that information should move. So my example here is a smart cinema. This came up again in one of the seminars. What would it be like if when you went and sat in the cinema, your experience was influenced to some extent by who was there or by the devices that were carried? Okay. So the key takeaway, I think, is that this difference between pervasive and ambient. The Internet of Things allows us to have ambient environments, but those environments are hybrids between not just digital and physical, but between humans and non-human actors. And then the other takeaway is to think about your installation in terms of this time, this kind of rhythm of interaction. What happens before the anticipation, the information that's provided before the experience, the way that the experience is curated, whether that is a fixed length of time or it's a responsive length of time, depending on what you do, or whether it's entirely up to the visitors how that time unfolds. And then lastly, what happens afterwards? So what is the experience for the people who finished the installation? Okay, we'll finish there. So we've got the seminars as usual. And I say just a reminder, I will be here next week for the catch-up week. If you want to come along to then, and also I will be in the seminars next week to give any more advice about the assignments. If you can't make it, then as usual the content will be on Keats. There will be this summary of what I'm after for the assessment. Okay, and if I don't see you next week for any reason, have a wonderful Christmas and see you next year. Okay. Hello. Okay, so you mean what tables or graphics? So the tables. Let's walk just in case people want to. Have you got your stuff? Yeah, get your stuff and then we'll. Hi.
Hello.
Nice.
Hi. Do you mind if I take over?
No.
Hello, good morning.
How are you?
Very well.
Excellent.
You?
Good, thank you.
Are you coping with your...
Yeah, I'm actually finished. Well, I was finished already like 10 days ago. So I went through a couple of things again. I feel I'm good, but again, I would love to just show you some stuff maybe. I don't know, you want to do this? Excellent. I appreciate it. Okay. Thank you. Angus.
That's so nice. And I didn't have breakfast, so awesome. Yeah, you are. Right?
Yeah.
So this is your breakfast.
Actually,
Today is
I made a cake which was really bad. I made a cake yesterday. I didn't bother to have a breakfast. I had a slice of cake. It was quite horrible.
I put pizza for breakfast.
Oh, really?
Favorite time. Oh, we'll pass it around.
So, do we have a lecture this week?
No. No, we're done. Today is the conclusion.
Another question. For next semester, when do we have reading?
February 18th to February from the 18th to 22nd, but I will finish on Thursday.
Yeah.
You could have it from Thursday 14th of February.
Do we finish on Thursday?
Oh, good question. Yeah, don't listen to me because we have new modules.
Yeah.
You have what? We have new modules, so we don't really know the timetable yet.
Yes. Let me look if I have my induction slides.
Well, Joe, it's actually still September.
don't have it.